Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back to the main stage. Thank you, Mark and Matt, for joining me on this stage. And before we begin talking about customer success in the perspective of the Chief Revenue Officer of a company, why don't you, tell us a little bit about yourselves, background, and some fun fact about yourselves.
See, this is where the dynamic questions here that kill us. Hey, Mark Roberge, excited to be here, folks. I joined HubSpot as the fourth employee, ran global sales and services for the first 7 years of the business, up to about $100 million in revenue. Last couple of years, I've been working on our journey into the sales software space. Prior to that, I was at MIT at business school. I've never done sales before, so it's been a really interesting ride that I'm excited to share stories about, a lot of the mistakes that I made. Come back to me on the fun fact. I'll defer that.
All right, so hi everyone. My name's Matt Rosenberg. I'm the CRO of Eventbrite. I've been with the business for coming up on 4 years now. Before Eventbrite, I was not in the ticketing and registration space. I was in the service renewal industry with a company called ServiceSource, where I was their global head of sales. We grew the business from, when I joined them, it was around $2 to $3 billion under management. To when I left, it was around $12 to $13 billion under management. Before then, a series of startups, and all on the sales side. So sort of grew up through the sales channel. Before that, and this may be my fun fact or the real discouraging fact for everyone in the room, I was a corporate attorney. And I was a really, really bad attorney at that, which is why I left after only a couple years. That's my fun fact.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about the role of the Chief Revenue Officer in your companies? Although everyone knows HubSpot and Eventbrite for all of their great success, and congrats on that. Few words about those companies and what you guys do.
Sure, it's been a kind of a moving sequence for us as we've moved into a multi-product world. I think generically speaking, my opinion on where the CRO our role came from is this emphasis on the front line being a cohesive experience for the customer. I think decades ago it was easier for marketing to go off, and I always joke that when I go out and consult with marketing and sales teams, that marketers would think that salespeople are overpaid, spoiled brats, and salespeople think that marketers do arts and crafts all day. And that was fine 10 or 20 years ago, but today with all the talk about the buyer journey starting online and then moving to a human-to-human conversation, that type of culture is really the kiss of death. And that's really where the CRO, I think, has come from, is to put some accountability on that go-to-market line between that experience, and that's bleeded into everything we've been talking about today, which is in that post-sale experience. I think for us, as we grew, probably around 150, 200 employees, we realized that the marketing team and the sales team and the customer success team started to get a different definition of what an ideal customer was for us. They were kind of solving for their own discipline. Marketers really liked people that were easy to get to fill out landing pages, because that was their job. And sales were really like people where it was easy to get their credit card. And customer success really liked people that you could make successful on the product. And so obviously the customer success folks were most right, but it gets complicated when you grow and you're not all in the same room anymore to make sure those rules and regulations are embedded throughout the whole front line. And I think that's really where the CRO role evolves.
Yeah, and so for Eventbrite, just a little bit of background, we're now processing around $2 billion of registrations a year. Thank you everybody for registering for this great event through Eventbrite. We all appreciate it. But our evolution of the CRO as really, if you think about, I've been there for a little over 4 years, our business has had a lot of changes, and a lot of the changes have come from the fact that we are a multi-channel business in that we make our money when someone transacts with us through whatever channel. So there's two primary channels. There's a self-sign-on channel where you can come to Eventbrite, sign up, and run an event. And then there's a sales channel. And so when the business started, I think it was conceived really as building an elegant, beautiful product that was simple and easy to use. And we very much had a product and engineering orientation. When I was introduced to the business, I think there was a little bit of, here comes the salesperson into the mix, and how's this going to interact with the elegance of building great product? And I think what became clear was the CRO really needs to step back and understand what the market's saying in a way that perhaps product and engineering isn't understanding. So how do you bring the insights of the market back to the business to help engineer product in a way that we're hearing the market to need? And then similarly, I think to echo your point, what we really ran into was this tension between, on the sales side, there's a heck of a lot of accountability. It's very easy to measure and manage sales. You have a quota, you hit it or you miss it. There's a lot of inputs that go into hitting that quota, of course, on the marketing side. And so it was align the CRO across all the revenue streams to bring a level of accountability and precision to everything we're doing. And I think that's been one of the big changes for us, is to drive accountability across the business. And then I think as we've matured, we've realized the key to our growth in our business is retention, right? Like you can spend an incredible amount of money, and we measure every dollar we spend, we measure the ROI in every input. But if you're just losing that revenue, and we always use the proverbial leaky bucket analogy, but it sure is a lot more cost effective to retain those customers than it is to acquire new customers. And so the CRO as a function sits above figuring out what the market needs, aligning all interests to a metric, and then ultimately bringing that accountability across the business and ensuring that we're making the right investment decisions. Because if we keep over-investing on new revenue and not paying attention to retained revenue, it's not the most efficient yield for our dollars spent. And so that's sort of a quick insight, or maybe a long insight if you have to listen to me, into how we evolved into the CRO role at Eventbrite.
Cool. So that's very interesting, because basically what you're saying is that both is that customer success is a revenue function, right? And you treat that as a business, and you are, and the role of the CRO is to integrate all the revenue parts of the business into one cohesive operating model. And I think, I tend to agree with exactly what you guys are saying. My question, let's kind of focus a little bit more about the customer success part, which is kind of the post-sale. And I know that you both have been doing this for quite some time, so can you share a little bit about what was your initial perspective and how did that evolve through the years? What were some of the key learnings?
Yeah, I wish we had a conference like this. It would have been helpful. So we literally started our first customer success team, I think, in 2008, 2009, when I don't even know if there were a lot of titles called customer success when we kicked it off, and we did it all wrong. The reason we did it was we had a whole bunch of customers that were churning. And we said, listen, whenever someone is at risk, let's get engaged with them and bring them back on the phone. And I think after 6 or 9 months, we were like, this is a complete fool's errand. We closely measured how much we were investing in that program, and how much we were able to improve that churn rate based on what it was like without customer success, and it was minuscule. And as we looked at it, we realized this is just too late. And after that, we focused on what we called customer happiness. So we implemented this program called CHI, which was Customer Happiness Index. And we measured a whole bunch of things around their usage of the software that we thought would correlate toward happiness. And the challenge there was a customer may be happy, but they might not be successful. And is that really what we wanted? So we kind of came to this real philosophical question of what are we trying to solve for? Is it retention or happiness or success? And from the outside world, it's like they all sound the same to me, but tactically speaking, they would have been very different. And as you break it down like that, we came to the conclusion that we should focus on success, because if they're successful, they'll likely be happy and want to retain. But happiness and retention don't necessarily correlate with success. So that was really the journey for us. And all that meant was, how do we define success? For us, that really had to do with traffic and lead lift, because we're a marketing software package. And then what are some of the leading indicators of success? And for us back in the day, it was around the breadth of their app usage.
So,
right? So
why leading indicators? What was the...
Yeah, I mean, just because, as Matt was saying, churn is the silent killer of modern software businesses, right? I mean, we've all moved to this, many of us have moved to a subscription-based model. And unless you have negative revenue churn, as the industry calls it, you're eventually going to hit a scale where you cannot grow further. So it's really critical to get ahead on churn, and unfortunately that's a lagging indicator. And by the time the churn occurs, you can be kind of screwed, right? Because you've got such a big customer base built up. So the leading indicators of success and retention and happiness were critical to us. And studying those, the good thing about SaaS is we have access to everything our customer's doing, and oftentimes how they're performing on our software. In our case, we know on a customer basis what their traffic and lead lift is on a month-to-month basis. We never share that, but we certainly can tell how successful they're being, and we can correlate that back to usage of our software. And now we've broken down, we don't have to say to our customer success folks, make the customer successful, which, how do you do that? We can say things like, if they're using more than 5 apps within our feature set, that usually leads to success, which leads to happiness and retention. And that's much more of a tangential goal.
Yeah. In the morning keynote, I've kind of mentioned this. What you call leading indicators, I call this drivers and outcomes, right? The churn or retention is the outcome, while the things that you do on onboarding and nurturing and so forth, this is what drives the ultimate result. So I think we were very much aligned on that, but I didn't prep Mark for that. He came ready. What about you? What's some of the learnings that you guys have had in the mirror of years?
Yeah, no, I think Mark came ready, and I hate to follow that answer. But I don't think we were quite as thoughtful in how we got to where we got to. I think we learned a lot by just doing and experimenting, and I think in some large part I was quite selfish in how we got to where we got to, because when we started the business, we had your traditional model of a sales team on one side and call it old school account management on the other. And the sales team would go out, they would close the business, they'd throw it over the wall to the account management team would pick it up and have to fix everything that was wrong or sold incorrectly. And then when things got escalated, it got escalated to me. And I would look around and say, well, who else cares about this? Why am I getting all these calls? And so what we did as a business was we realigned the whole business to that metric called revenue. So sales and account management, we had management that was solely measured on revenue as opposed to just the new sale target. They had targets that stretched across new and returning. And that really brought everybody into alignment. It made sure that what we sold was sold right. It really penalized management for letting their sellers sell things that the product couldn't support, and that allowed a lot of symmetry. And frankly, my phone stopped ringing, which was a really great thing for me. So that's how it all started. And then it has evolved since then into, and this is the always interesting conversation with the CFO, which is, look, like we always think about investing on new opportunities, but we really ought to be channeling investment dollars into the success of our customers. And that's a harder sell for whatever reason. I think the legacy of the sales world is you invest on the front end sellers and not on the back end retention and happiness folks. And so we had to shift that model. We shifted it through data. So I'd say the biggest thing that we've learned is it's all about the data. And so we began to study our cohorts. We call a cohort a group of customers that signs up in a given year. And we started watching those cohorts, and not surprisingly, they're amazingly predictable. They behave in a certain way. And so you can predict your revenue stream over time, but if you could do those little things to influence that cohort, you actually have a much bigger gain in revenue than any investment you could make on the front end. And so that led us to think, well, how do we make sure our customers are happier or have chi, right? And so to that point, we then said it really starts with the first touch and the onboarding. And so we've really been evolving our business into how do we make sure that customers first touch with Eventbrite to the first time they set up their event page to go live is a flawless process. And if we could deliver on that, we believe that act alone will drive a lot of retention. And so that's where a lot of our investment dollars have flown. So it's all been a learning path for us.
So Matt, can you talk a little bit more about, I'm interested in two things. So let's do this one by one. Kind of few seconds on cohorts. I know that everyone hears cohorts analysis and cohorts. Can you talk a little bit more in practical terms what it means for you? What do you guys do in a cohort analysis?
Yeah, so a cohort for us is anybody that signs up or buys our product in a given year. So we studied on annual cohorts, and we look at it from dollar retention, customer count retention. We look at it by category, subcategory, geo, dollar segment. I mean, there are a million ways you can study it, but it begins to give us a fact pattern from which we can work on. You can start to see if one cohort's outperforming another cohort. You can then drive in and figure out what happened, like what did we do wrong? We have some cohorts that perform a lot better than other cohorts, and so what do we do right? And so there's just a lot you can learn by beginning to strip your business apart that way so that you could actually make sense of it. I mean, we have, last year alone, we have hundreds of thousands of organizers on our platform. That's a lot of data. So you have to figure out some model to make sense of it, and cohort for us is an easy way to structure it.
Cool. And Mark, let's start with you on this one. Account management, customer success. I've been hearing this a lot. People are saying we've started with the traditional account management approach, and then we've transitioned into a more customer success model. What does it mean to you, right? I mean, what is account management? How customer success is different? There's no right answer here. Just your opinion.
I think the account manager gets bucketed too into focus only on retention, as opposed to engaging earlier in the lifespan of that customer before retention even comes up. So I think it might be a nomenclature thing, but I think it sends the right signal to the team of what this is about. It also, I think, sets the right impression around the revenue focus, which I think is a bit of a touchy, controversial piece within this part of the segment as well. Is how can you have someone truly have the customer's best interest in mind when they're on a revenue quota, but at the same time, are they motivated enough if they're not on a revenue quota? And I think the right answer in there, I think, depends a lot on your customer and your context, but the labeling on customer success makes sure that their priorities are on that aspect of the relationship.
Yeah, I agree. And Matt, from your perspective, I mean, I know that this is a controversial question. Who's responsible for renewal and upsell? Is it customer success or is it a different team? And the reason why people are kind of struggling with this question is because they feel that as a customer success, we need to have the best interest of the customer in mind. When we involve commercial conversation, then it taints the picture. I personally strongly disagree with that, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I fall in your camp. I disagree with it as well. I mean, we have we call it account management, but essentially it's customer success. And the renewal is an outcome of all the different steps and inputs along the way. That's just a measurement of the success of the team and how they've either onboarded or all the steps and processes you put in place to get to the renewal. The renewal should become obvious. It should be an easy conversation. Account management, it's a hard conversation because you're talking to them for the first time, or you're talking to them in the wrong context, or there hasn't been that relationship and goodwill brought up. And so it ends up being a harder conversation. But to your question specifically, within that customer success team, we have slightly different functions. We have onboarding teams, we have management teams, and then we have the strategic reps who are really responsible for driving that renewal and bringing that to close and negotiating the commercials. But I do all want that on one team, and I do believe the metric that we should all align to is still revenue, because that's the company metric. And you do run into some tension between customer happiness and revenue, but if you built a customer-focused process, it's less of a scary thing, because the way you own and manage that relationship, that process will lead to the renewal, thus the revenue, and I think everybody can stay aligned.
So in your kind of both of your experiences, was there any aha moment where you kind of came into the model with one assumption and you've operated on that, and then you realized something that was maybe obvious today but wasn't obvious to begin with? Is there any such learning?
Yeah, the big one for me was I thought the entire customer retention and success outcome was driven by the post-sale experience. And at least for us, and I've actually seen this in a lot of other organizations, I've been amazed at how much the pre-sale experience actually influences the ultimate outcome of this customer. And so once we define our customer success target, this isn't just the ownership of the post-sale team. An example I can give you is just on compensation of the hunters. When we first came out of the gate, our plan was very hunting oriented, where it rewarded reps for the new revenue that came in. And the only penalty we had on lack of customer success on the hunters was after 4 months, if they made it, they kept their commission. If they churned anytime within the first 4 months, we clawed the whole commission back, typically called the clawback. Well, guess what our retention line looked like in the early days? It was like 0% through month 4 and then spiked in month 5, right? It's like reps are coin operated. And these are the early days. And an example, and I've written about this before, was when we started to have in the early days a churn problem, we analyzed the churn based on the customer success folks, and the variance was extremely small. But then when I analyzed it on the pre-sale reps, the variance was enormous. And I was like, holy cow, this whole churn issue is the expectations that are being set by the salespeople and the types of customers that they're finding. Now, a lot of people in here are customer success. They're all shaking their head. Yeah, see, that's what I've been saying. This is a great, this is a great audience for the story. But anyway, so what I did, and I wouldn't necessarily advise this particular structure, but you can learn from the story, was I literally stack ranked the salespeople by churn and said, folks, this is critical, and I'm going to start compensating you on this next quarter. And sure enough, I rolled that out. It was a pretty aggressive approach. The top quartile, I doubled their variable compensation rate and said, listen, you're bringing the best customers, keep it up. The next quartile, I increased it by 50%. The quartile after that, I kept it the same, and the bottom quartile, I cut their variable pay in half. And, no one left, thankfully. We went through rapid training around bringing in good, successful customers. And within 6 months, I think we had, again, really early days, but a 70 or 80% drop in churn. Wow. So it was somewhat unique to our model because we have a fairly complicated onboarding process in terms of transforming people's marketing. But it's something that I think we've seen in other companies as well, is this isn't just a customer success issue. Everybody in the pre-sale has to contribute to it as well.
So a follow-up question on that to you, Mark. Do you think the reason why the churn was high was unrealistic expectations, the wrong customer set, both? Which one?
At the time, both. These are the early days. It's like the couple hundreds of customers, and we're in the tens of thousands. But it was both. And I think the other piece that I love too is trying to create these cross-functional pods as close to the front line as possible. So as you scale to hundreds of marketers and sellers and customer success, as opposed to having different rooms and floors of them and trying to manage the handoff, see if you can experiment with smaller cross-functional teams, potentially even under one frontline manager, right? Maybe 2 SDRs, 5 reps, and 3 customer success people. Then that manager has complete empowerment and autonomy to drive the end-to-end process. So something I've seen these organizations experiment with good success.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Matt, what about, what did you learn that was obvious in the beginning or not obvious and kind of change your opinion over time?
Right. It's going to, I apologize, sound a little repetitive, but I think it's a profound insight that Mark drew out, which when I explained the scenario that I walked into where I selfishly aligned teams around around revenue and one goal and change compensation models, it's essentially that same story, which was it's a simple task of putting customer success and outbound sellers on the same team with the same goal, aligned to the same metrics and the same way to see the business. That simple act fundamentally changed the way we behave to our customers. And to answer the question that you asked, Mark, I do believe it prevents the selling out of scope. It prevents the maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but I don't care, I'm going to get paid, I'm going to throw it over the wall to somebody else that has to fix it. That is the worst thing you could do for your customers. It crushes your brand. The easiest sales channel for us is reference accounts. It's the lowest cost of sale, the highest close rate at the greatest dollar value. So just simply eliminating that behavior actually opens up a very cost-effective acquisition channel for us. So for me, it was that aha moment where we were poorly servicing customers by not aligning interests of front-end sellers and the success folks, and simply changing incentives, compensation, and the way they sell had a huge impact on retention, morale, and ultimately how our brand's perceived in the market.
I think it's obvious that in losing customers is something that impacts morale very badly and also impacts your perception in the market for sure. So Matt, because Mark is stealing all your answers, we'll start with you this time.
Thank you. I was waiting. 16 minutes and 14 seconds.
Yeah, so let's take it kind of more into the corporate or the company's politics, right? I usually say that if customer success wants a seat at the table, if they want the CEO to refer to them during staff meetings, they need to own a number, right? But at the same time, you guys are saying that sometimes other executives in the company don't get it that well, the retention and the impact, the investment, and so forth. So what's your best talk track to a CFO or a CEO that helped you, get the funding, the resources, the alignment around where to invest and why to invest it?
Yeah. Well, I think the easiest way to gain alignment is to align your team around the goal that matters a lot to your business, which is revenue. So you've heard us talking about revenue as a driver. Once you own the revenue number for that, it naturally takes a seat at the table. You have that seat because you're representing, and when you think about most SaaS businesses or software businesses, the recurring revenue is the lion's share of the revenue.
So why is it not naturally like that? Why do you need to work to get the seat at the table?
Well, I don't know, and that's why for me it's data. I mean, just bring the business back to the data and how the business actually operates is the first step. Everybody glorifies the front end of the business, the selling part. You celebrate the wins, you gamify winning, you pay these salespeople and glorify these salespeople for their wins, and the people toiling in customer success are sort of toiling in obscurity, which is a strange phenomena given the fact that the majority of the revenue is actually coming out of the returning base. And so the value of a CRO in large part, if you can align both the front-end sellers and the recurring revenue under one office, is it does give you a lot of power in the organization. And the power is not just in representing the interests of the customer success, it's helping moderate product and engineering decisions, which I mentioned before. You're the only one that sits across the business that can make decisions that represent your clients. It's bringing client stories forward in a way that people listen to, where they wouldn't have listened to it before. And it's being an interesting counterbalance to the CFO, because the CFO obviously is controlling the purse strings and we're controlling the revenue piece of it. It's how do you have that balanced discussion? And so I think those are all the ways that you can get a seat at the table.
And Mark, who do you think who is involved in HubSpot beyond, let's say, the customer success team in decisions, budgeting, like what Matt said, engineering relationship? I mean, how does it work? In a sense of, if my goal is to retain a customer, who else is involved and how do I get resources and funding to implement, whatever needs to be implemented?
Over time, we started to break that journey up a bit, and at first we were hesitant to it because we think so many people throw resources at problems, but through different experiments, these throwing resources at problems actually worked quite well. And this vast debate of, in the pre-sale specialization across SDRs and hunters and all that kind of stuff, I think applies post-sale as well. We had huge success right out of the gate between separating the onboarding versus the long-term success and retention. And even from there, we had huge success in specializing what ended up being about a 60-day onboarding process, usually about 30-minute calls every other week or something, separating the technical setup from the onboarding, right? So we went from a world where, hey, you own this account, to first you do the technical setup, and we have this really great engineering person that's going to help you get set up, hopefully within 48 hours. And then you've got this awesome onboarding person that's going to own you for the first 60 days and really focus on your marketing goals and teach you how to use the software to align with those goals. And then you've got this person who's going to be there for a long-term relationship for you and come in as there's needs. So at least for us, that was the piece, was breaking it down. I just can I go back to that question too that
Sure.
Matt addressed, which I really liked. The turning point for us in terms of gaining a seat at the table was, if I look at a SaaS revenue stream or subscription revenue stream, I personally break growth down into three things. It's either how many reps am I adding or do I have? What's the productivity per rep? And then what's the revenue retention, which is a function of upgrade and churn. That's really the three drivers of your revenue growth. And when you get to a reasonable scale and start running sensitivity analyses on what it will take to, say, grow 80%, right? And you say, well, if we add an additional 2 reps a month, we can get there. Or if we increase productivity per rep by 20%, we can get there. Or if we drop churn by just 0.5%, that will move the needle. And it's our CFO, ironically, that brought this to the table. That it's like, wow, which one do we want to focus on? Do we want to end up with 1 million salespeople here who cost you a lot? Or what if we put a lot of investments to try to get that 0.5% churn drop and achieve the goal that way, and what would that do for our business?
So kind of follow on that. So why do you think do you think it needs convincing?
I think it's a legacy mindset. I mean, the software world especially, we're growing out of a mantra of these on-premise, enterprisey, multi-million-dollar purchases that took 18 months to decide, and once you got the contract signed, your professional services people flew in and installed it in the plumbing, and some C-level person at the company put their career on the line to buy you. Churn wasn't a problem, right? They were stuck with you for 5 years, and it ended up being shelfware in a lot of situations. But those times are gone. Now we're in SaaS, we're in low-friction selling, and low-friction onboarding means low-friction offboarding too. So it's a totally different game, and the reason why we're having problems is because people have a legacy mindset.
I think just one other comment on that. I think now you have the ability to influence retention in ways you couldn't before because you could see the data differently and better. I think before people were guessing as to why customers were leaving, or there was a story behind every customer account that left. Now you can, if you're smart about your data, smart about your business, you understand your business well, you can anticipate and predict what's going to happen in the business, and you can start to influence it in ways that I don't think we've ever had before. And so there are a lot more levers available to drive retention. And so I completely agree. Like the idea of investing the expensive dollars on new acquisition versus investing dollars against a much bigger revenue base to drive increased outcomes is a much better bet. And so that's a big aha for most companies, but it is. That's why I go back to the data. Like if you can present the data, run the scenarios, you're going to be better off with your CFO.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I mean, the way I'm describing this, I'm saying that the new model is a recurrent revenue business model, which your models are different. You're doing SaaS, you're doing something else, more transactional, but still a recurrent revenue business model. And the second thing, to your point, Matt, and both to you, Mark, is the fact that the new cloud architecture is different, right? So you have visibility, and you use technology to distribute your software, and everything is being recorded on your cloud, and you can see what's going on and take action. So with that, we kind of chatted a little bit before that. I want to add the marketing piece into the conversation, right? Let's talk a little bit more about the one-to-many, the communication with the customer base. How do you find it different, or how do you, some anecdotes that you've been thinking through customer marketing? Because if there is a top of funnel marketing, top of funnel sales, and we realize that there is customer success for the post-sale, how is marketing different in the customer universe?
Yeah. I'm assuming I'll go first.
I don't want to steal your answers.
I didn't want to take this answer. All right. So I think for us, the other advantage of a CRO is accountability. All right. So I mentioned it's easy to have accountability around sales, and it's easy to have accountability around retention. But for us, it's having someone overlay across all the different marketing channels and bringing consistency around what are those inputs that we need to drive the right outputs. And it stems all the way from customer acquisition to retention. And I think one of the beauties of why the CRO model is getting embraced is there's always been a lot of accountability down the line in the sales channel. It's an old tried and true model about measure and reward, but it always hasn't been the case around marketing, where ROI has been a little bit more ambiguous, a little bit grayer. You could say, well, my customers hear about our brand and that has a certain value. Well, that's a challenging model in this day and age, because you do need to figure out what is the return on every dollar spent. And it really starts at the top of the funnel. You need clear metrics on leads, to marketing qualified leads, to sales qualified leads, to figuring out what are the resources you need. And then it stems all the way down onto the success side. And so it's, if you really want to scale your organization, you have to understand what are those channels that are actually driving the highest results. You have to invest heavily into that. I often view my job a little bit like a investor in some respects. I have a pool of funds, and my dollars will always follow the best channel. My job is to understand what are the best channels, from the marketing side to hiring new reps to how do we think about tools for customer success. And so the interesting question that you didn't ask is, why is there so much more investment on the front-end marketing tools than on the success tools? And that's a fast emerging market. You obviously know that. But it's always a lot easier to get the investment up front, which doesn't make sense to me, than the investment on the back side of it. But ultimately, it's the same thing. You have to measure every part of it to get the ROI.
I know some folks in my company that if you solve this riddle of how to convince people to spend more money on technology for customer success, will be very happy.
But it ties to tying that together with, look, if you fundamentally change the trajectory of retention, your business trajectory fundamentally changes. And that's the conversation you have to have.
So Mark, you told me before a very interesting story about customer marketing. Maybe you can share it with the audience.
Yeah, I think the specific conversation I remember is our customer success leader saying that he had heard that the open rate for you've been tagged in a Facebook photo was like 99.5%. Wow. And it makes sense. And I think that's symbolic of the opportunity we have with customer marketing is, there's so much focus, as Matt said, on the pre-sale marketing. Let's take 50,000 names and throw in some lead nurturing campaign, and they've never heard of us before. And we have no idea what to say to them because we have no idea who they are. And there's a lot of work on doing 22 different cuts on the segment from a segmentation standpoint to send the right message, and who knows if that's actually worth it. But if you apply that same approach to the post customer world, I think it is worth it. The more one-to-one you can get, you have a lot more accurate information between the information that was gathered by the salesperson to get deep down in the context, down to what features they're actually using and not using, to the specific events that are happening with their business through your software. And there's a huge opportunity to be able to, I think, almost do one-to-one marketing with them, whether it's through email or in-app messages, to try to influence that next step in behavior. So again, the Facebook story was the one that triggered our vision around that.
Yeah, obviously I agree with that very much. Because I shared with you before that when we launched campaign, which is customer marketing capabilities into Tango, and we looked at the data after quite some time, we've noticed that the open rate across our base is 60%, which is a huge number. We have folks coming from marketing teams, and we've done some research, and we learned that only churches have like a 30% open rate. So we're going to double the church open rate.
Wow.
Cool. Any kind of last thoughts before we adjourn? Things that you feel that we forgot? I mean, you know what? Let's put it this way. What advice would you give to a new CRO coming in to a recurring revenue business? What would you tell them to focus on?
Yeah, so I think for me, my advice would be there's so many processes that are probably already in your organization that deserve to be relooked at. There's an opportunity to reinvent every single part of that customer experience. And when you look at that, think about what is the impact to the customer? How does it tie you to the product? Because it is it's very easy to change product right now. And so you're looking to draw those ties, that connection, to develop the emotional attachment to a product in ways that we didn't have to think about before. And what I found, and I think what any CRO looking at the business objectively would find, is if you can reinvent the way you've done business and constantly push to reinvent it by looking at every process and asking why, you'll find there's a heck of a lot of opportunity to deepen relationships with customers, drive better and higher customer goodwill, and ultimately have the impact that I think we're all striving to have, which is deliver more revenue, which frees up more investment, which allows us to grow our team and our business. And so really don't be afraid to take tried and true and traditional processes and smash them apart. Rebuild them, figure out if they're not going to work, break them again. And so we've had a history at Eventbrite in my 4 years of breaking things over and over again until we get it right. And I think that's just a good formula for a CRO or a good formula for life.
Yeah, I love that. I'd build on that. I think there's a lot of innovation that's, you have an opportunity. And the framework that I'd use to build off of Matt's comment is to start with the buying journey as opposed to your sales and onboarding process. And it sounds obvious, but so few organizations do it. When they go out and start building their process, they build it around what they want their salespeople to do and what they want their customer success people to do. But the best place to start is what is your buyer's perception of where they want to go? And don't have that buying journey end with a signed contract. have that buy-in journey end with successful implementation and usage of the product, and have it go all the way through, then base everything on top of that journey. And then you'll find that all your folks are more aligned with your buyers.